Hey guys, we are back updating the Power Rankings for Survivor 49 following episode 10, which was a somewhat interesting episode with an interesting vote result by the end of it. Though with that said, I still feel like I have a good sense of where the season is going, but we'll get to that soon enough. But we have 8 people to talk about. I'm going to spend some more time. Let's go into the video. So starting off at number 8, we have the latest boot from the season, and here we have Joanne, who ends up going out in a somewhat interesting fashion here, where while they had been presenting Joanne and Sage as being these middle people, this is the episode where they pretty much get exposed here, where the likes of Sophie S and the Savannah, Rizzo, Sophie B contingent all figure that out and decide to flip the game against Joanne here, taking him out in a 5-3-1 vote here. And while Joanne wasn't necessarily the person I was looking at to be voted out coming into the episode, where, to be honest, I was expecting Christina to be the boot more so there, I was still expecting by the time of Tribal, where at the point where they did talk about wanting to flip the game on Joanne and Sage, that it was probably going to go through here, especially with Joanne wanting to target Savannah, while that storyline seemed to be culminating as well, to where it's not too surprising by the end of it that Joanne ends up going out here. And if we're talking about Joanne more generally, he was a somewhat interesting figure in the season, where he was someone I was pretty high on in the preseason, though I think that faded pretty quickly once the season actually started, with him getting a lot of undermining and him just not coming off in the greatest light here. And while it did turn up for him a little bit later on in his run, with him coming off as his swing vote, it never really felt like it was going to lead to him winning, to where it always felt like the Savannah side was going to win the war over him, and that there was going to be some point along the way where he would be taken out. So that's not too surprising there. And with him now being out of the game, I do have him here at number 8. And before we continue, I am once again partnering up with Russell Muscle TV to promote Idle Plays. Idle Plays is an online shop where you can purchase Survivor puzzles and practice them so that you can be the next challenge beast on Survivor. And with Survivor 50 just around the corner, you can purchase relics from Survivor history with my Creator Camp package, which includes the Labyrinth puzzle, the Slide puzzle, and Spencer's 5-piece puzzle from Survivor Cambodia. If all that sounds exciting to you, feel free to click the link in my description and start shopping now. And with that, we have 7 people left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll rank in the midst on how likely they are to win the game based on their edit and current game position. But number 7, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on, is still Christina. And as I alluded to earlier, I actually expected Christina to be the boot coming into the episode, both from a game perspective, where obviously with her being on the outs at the Alex vote, it did seem like this power shift had taken place. It did seem like Christina was going to be on the outs moving forward, and with Steve and me more likely to win immunity, that Christina would be collateral damage. Even from an edit standpoint, you had all the setup to her idol and people telling each other about the idol. Also the fact that Sophie B had her knowledge as power. It didn't feel like that was set up to her eventually having her idol taken, but instead that did not happen, where Christina did not get taken out here. She did get to play her idol without it being stolen. That's something at least. Though with that said, this was still not a great episode for her, where she is once again on the outs, where she was part of this plan to split the vote onto Savannah and Rizzo, with her throwing a soul vote onto Rizzo in case the idol was played on Savannah there. So they do at least say to explain that, though it did not ultimately work out by the end, where instead she is on the outs when Joanne gets taken out. Though with that said, she did get a decent amount of content as well in the episode, where she does get shown being pretty emotional early on after the Alex blindside, her not taking that well. She has a big breakdown before the reward challenge where she misses her mom, and later during the challenge you have her like fighting on the balance beam, sort of channeling her inner Suri there. So again, she at least gets that, though even then it doesn't feel like it adds that much to the season. Whereas while this is not the first time we have heard Christina talking about her mom and her passing, it doesn't feel that significant to the actual storyline of the season, where it doesn't feel like we're meant to see this as this big overarching thing. It just feels like something that came up because it was relevant to the episode. And with Christina having this big moment during the challenge, it felt like they just had to showcase that. So obviously that doesn't really elevate my view of Christina there. And just in general, I come out of this episode feeling the same about Christina, where she still doesn't feel like that big of a character, where it feels like she's mainly getting content when it's relevant, more so than her like being showcased like when it's not as necessary for her to be shown. And beyond that, she is obviously not in a great game spot either, where she is still on the outside of this round. It feels like she's running out of runway. It just feels like a matter of time before she does eventually get taken out there. So it's for that reason that I still have her here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and this person has dropped off quite a bit after this last episode, as I feel like this is a bit of a turning point for their trajectory on the season. But at number 6, we do have Sage. And obviously this was a pretty bad episode for Sage, gameplay wise, where she ends up losing her closest ally in Joanne. That's not particularly great. And she does also get caught playing the middle here, where at this point you have like the Rizzo, Savannah, Sophie B side, like catching on to the fact that Sage and Juwan are playing the middle. And you even have them talking about how it's their turn to take control of the game. So obviously, that's not particularly great. It does seem like Sage is not in the greatest spot at this point, and someone who could potentially be voted out soon, based purely off that. But obviously, from an Ed standpoint as well, she also gets a ton of focus in this episode, where we see her talking through how she's playing the middle, where she's trying to let on to the Rizzo, Savannah, Sophie B side that she's with them, when in reality she's not, which leads to this pretty funny confessional, where in moments, Savannah's saying confessional that like Juwan and Sage are on the same page as them and that they're going to work together, only to immediately cut to Sage being like, no, Savannah is toast. So I did find that moment pretty funny. Though the fact that Sage gets all this content of her playing the middle, only to be caught by the end of it, is not the greatest look there. And while Sage is ultimately spared over Juwan here, it's still not great that she is ultimately like undercut by the end of it, where essentially all the work that she has done is to highlight the fact that she eventually gets caught by other people in doing so. And with her also not being the greatest gain spot at this point, I'm just not feeling it for Sage at this point, to where she is here at number 6. And moving on to number 5, we have yet another person who is currently on the outs, but at number 5 we do have Steven. And Steven is once again not in the greatest spot, where he is still on the bottom after this episode, where he is part of this plan to target Savannah, however that does not go through. And it did seem like he was going to be the target as well for a decent amount of the episode, where you had the likes of Rizzo and Sophie B talking about wanting to target Steven here, and you even have Sophie B saying how despite Steven doing this damage control with her after the tribal for voting against Sophie B, that Sophie B doesn't really forgive him for that. So obviously that's not particularly great here. Now, I think beyond that, like Steven is still like probably the most likely winner out of the people currently on the bottom, where he has obviously shown an ability to win immunity challenges and is also seen to be pretty well respected by the jury. So at least that's something at least, but really I don't think he's likely to get off the bottom at this point, to where unless he wins out, he's probably going to be targeted relatively soon anyway. And also with him not getting the greatest content in the world, with him being pretty confident that the Savannah plan was going to go through, only for that to not succeed by the end of it, mixing in the fact that he's not really being presented as an underdog, but instead being talked about as a threat, I'm just not feeling it for Steven at this point. So because of that, I do have him here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this is the highest I've had this person all season, at least since the preseason, but at number 4 we do have Sophie S. And this was an interesting episode for Sophie S here, where she does get a decent amount of content with her seeming to be the swing vote here, where she ends up justifying her decision to flip against her old Heenas the previous round to help take out Alex. In this episode, she is shown once again, like sort of being the middle position. She talks quite a bit about how she wants to target Juwan and Sage because they're the ones playing the middle when she wants to be in that position, how she wants to be the one who is driving the action here. So I feel like that's decent strategic content, and that does justify her decision to ultimately side with Rizzo, Savannah, and Sophie B to take out Juwan here. And beyond that, you have the likes of Savannah telling her about her extra vote. You have Sage telling her about Christina's idol. So we are also seeing her like being somewhat trusted as a number there. So again, I feel like we get quite a bit of Sophie S in this episode. Not to mention the fact that she also wins immunity in this episode, so that's also pretty good. So again, I do feel like this is probably the highest I've been on Sophie S at this point in the season. Though with that said, I still think it's too little too late, where while we are getting a lot of Sophie S now in the season, it does feel like we're getting her because she's just an important number for this particular vote, not because she's that important to the storyline of the season. I feel like even on that, she is still strongly lacking in personal content, where we still don't know that much about her as a person, where again, it feels like most of her content is about her like as a player in the game and what she's doing in the game. And on top of that, I think you can also question her actual decision here to flip, where I feel like while she does flip to the majority, to the Uli side of things, it feels like she's clearly the fourth within that, where it feels like Rizzo, Savannah, and Sophie B are much closer to each other than they are to Sophie S, to where it'll be difficult for Sophie S to actually get to the end by sticking with this group. And yes, while she could try like playing the middle and flipping back and forth, I feel like she's the type of player who would get caught trying to play that type of strategy anyway. And I feel like she doesn't really have much of a backbone in the edit beyond that to make me think the season will play out in a way that will favor Sophie S winning at the end. So it's for that reason that I'm still not feeling that great about Sophie S actually winning the season. But it's the fact that she is part of the majority at this point. It's the fact that she does get her way by the end of it in her like playing the middle and being part of the majority. And the fact that we are finally getting more of her on the season, that leads to her being at least this high on the list, though not much higher than number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we had the same top 3 as last week, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But number 3, I did decide to keep with my top 3 from last week. By number 3, we do have Rizzo. And Rizzo has, once again, a pretty interesting episode where he once again gets through another tribal with keeping his idol and even plays a fake idol at tribal at that. Though with that said, that didn't get much shout to it, but whatever. But in a lot of ways, this episode feels pretty similar to what we've gotten from Rizzo the last couple of weeks, with him getting some goofy content, with him like starting a boy band with Steven and Jawan, which again was just kind of a whatever scene. You also have him getting strategic content with him talking about the plan to target Steven for a lot of it. Though with that said, I don't feel like we get much from Rizzo in terms of targeting Jawan and Sage, where I feel like out of him, Savannah, and Sophie B, he's probably the one that doesn't really get to talk much about the plan to flip onto Jawan and Sage. He doesn't get to weigh on much of that, which was a factor in why I didn't have him too much higher than where he was last week. Or while this wasn't an entirely bad episode for Rizzo, where again, it was still a pretty fine one by the end of it, he's still in a pretty decent gain spot. He still has his idol. I feel like this episode didn't do much to improve my view of Rizzo, where I still come out of this episode feeling pretty similar to him compared to where I had him before, which is why I did decide to keep him around the same spot here at number 3. And moving on to number 2, and we are once again sticking with the order compared to last week. By number 2, we do have Sophie B, who once again has a pretty fine episode here where she gets a decent amount of strategic content with her talking about how she initially wants to target Steven, though later on pivots to want to target Jawan and Sage after it becomes clear to them that Jawan and Sage are flipping back to the other side. And we do get to see her weighing in a bit on that decision, whether to target Jawan or Sage in this current position, and ultimately they do end up doing so. And we also get her talking once again about her knowledge is power, which culminates in her not using it on Christina, which is different from what I expected, where for a lot of the season I was expecting Sophie B to ultimately use her knowledge is power to steal Christina's idol. And I feel like there have been a decent amount of setup for that to happen, with people like talking about Christina's idol. You have Alex mentioning earlier about how he wanted to use that info against her, which didn't lead to much. You have even this episode, you have Sage like telling people about Christina's idol. And I did figure that it would eventually get back to Sophie B in a position to where Sophie B would use the knowledge's power to take Christina's idol to essentially guarantee that someone from the other side would go home here. But instead, it doesn't happen, which I did find that a bit strange here. And I'm not really sure what to make of that in terms of Sophie B's overall trajectory, where on one hand, she does at least explain why it would make sense to not use it, as she doesn't want to look foolish by being wrong on her guess. She doesn't want to take this big shot and miss and make herself a bigger target because of that. So again, there's at least some rationale for her on her end in terms of why she doesn't use it. Though with that said, I still find it kind of strange that we got all the setup to Sophie B using the knowledge's power in this position only for that to not happen here. And while it's possible she could still use it the following round, I feel like there just aren't that many natural opportunities for her left to use it in the game. And I do feel like her not using it when she had gotten set up to potentially using it before could be seen as this missed opportunity, where I think that could explain like why she ends up going on to lose a game, where maybe she didn't take the opportunities that she should have, how she didn't take risks when taking risks is seen as a good thing in Survivor. So I think that could definitely be a knock against there, though if I'm being honest, I think this episode on the whole was just kind of fine for Sophie B. It didn't do that much to lower my view on her, but with that said, it also didn't do much to elevate my view of her. So it's for that reason that I did decide to leave her behind here at number 2. And now at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 49 at this point is still Savannah, who ends up having a pretty interesting episode here where she does ultimately win the war here and taking out Jawan. We're considering that had been a pretty major storyline this season, with her having this vendetta against Jawan. The fact that she is finally able to get him out in this episode is something at least. And while it was a bit of an interesting journey to get there, where Savannah had spent a lot of the episode talking about how, despite their ups and downs, she thought that Jawan and Sage were finally on the same page as her and that they were working together, it does lead to Savannah eventually figuring that out by the end of it, where she does find out that Jawan and Sage are flipping against her, and that does like kind of spark her and her group into action to flipping the vote against Jawan and Sage. Though even when that did happen, she did say she would have rather targeted Sage in that position over Jawan, and that does make the storytelling here a bit wonky. The fact that she did want to target Sage, only for the plan to shift to Jawan, to where she doesn't technically get her way there, but I think that could be remedied in the next episode by Savannah explaining why she targeted Jawan instead, how she finally won the war there. So I am willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, at least for this week, as again, they were at least trying to obscure who the actual target was in that spot. So obviously take that for what you will. But I will knock her as well from a game position. The fact that she was once again being targeted, where she does ultimately get 3 votes at this tribal, is obviously not great and will definitely harm my view of her when I get around to the player ranking. but she is still in the majority for this round. She does ultimately use her extra vote to ensure that she is able to get Jawan in a 5-3-1 vote, where even if she didn't have the extra vote, she probably still would have gotten her way there in a 4-3-1 vote. And once again, her group is able to hold the numbers, where they are once again able to get out someone who was not in their alliance, and it does seem like this grouping that she's part of is getting one step closer to getting towards the end together. And considering that we had gotten that set up to this Rizzo, Savannah, Sophie B final 3, it is looking more and more likely that that group is going to ultimately win the day here, where despite Jawan and Sage like being propped up as like these people playing in the middle, they ultimately got caught by the Savannah group. So obviously I think that does lead to Savannah here being in a pretty good light. And while I don't think much changed in this episode to really elevate my view of Savannah, I feel like not much really changed to lower my view of her either, where again, she does get out Jawan here. Her group does hold the numbers once again. And I still feel pretty confident that one of these top 3 are going to be the winners of the season. And I think with Savannah still being a number 1 here, I think that most reflects how I feel like my view of these 3 haven't changed too much. So it's for that reason that she is still here at number 1. And there we go. That'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really has it with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week once the season has started, where we'll be getting into these players and seeing just how wrong I am about all these people. So be on the lookout for that. And I'm also going to be covering a whole bunch of shows coming up, including The Amazing Race and Hell's Kitchen, so be on the lookout for that as well. I'm on Patreon and have YouTube memberships. If you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.